Good afternoon, folks. Hope you're well. It's a somewhat cloudy, but also somewhat sunny day here in countryside Illinois. Thank you for joining me here in Hardly Hollywood Studios in beautiful downtown Bowlby, while I attempt to give as coherently as possible, talk you through some of the points that I've been discovering and thinking about while I am working on the last, probably the last video in my series on the Bach chorales, which I've been titling Musings on the Bach chorales. Now, what I'm going to do today is I'm going to look at the last two settings of Herzliebster Jesu that Bach composed, and both of these appear in the St. Matthew Passion. And I want to talk about that. I will also quickly make note of the previous pair of settings which occur in the St. John Passion. We'll compare where they happen in the dramas of each passion. And then we'll talk a little about general comments, and we'll talk a little bit more about other things that I've been noticing. But by way of starting, I wanted to talk to you. I also wanted to give you a little bit of context. One of the reasons why I started doing this, or thought of doing this, was because of a seminar given by Professor John Hill at the University of Illinois, called on the Life and Works of JS Bach, wherein I looked at a small group of cantatas, all having to do with this one particular quote unquote feast day, that being the feast of the purification of the Blessed Virgin Mary. And I compared them and looked for commonalities that seemed interesting to me. And so that's how I did that. And while I was doing that, I came across this rather interesting article, which I'm showing you my copy of, which I got thanks to JSTOR, the free downloading service. I could use it at the college at DuPage. And this came out in the Musical Quarterly in 1970, and titled "How JS Bach Composed 4-Part Chorales." Don't remember whether I actually read that back when I was in the course or at UIUC or not. If I did, it was very quick, and it didn't have all that much to do with what I was dealing with. But I read it while I was working on this particular project. The other thing I wanted to talk a little bit about, and this is by way of and this is hardly an exhaustive literature survey, but something else that I came across recently was a video, YouTube video by Samuel Asafiev on YouTube, where he talked about one particular setting of Herzliebster Jesu, and which I found to be quite helpful, helping me formulate my ideas. So I wanted to briefly sort of mention him and say thank you, Mr. Asafiev, for that very insightful little video. Okay, and then so what I'm going to do is we're going to look mainly at the last two chorales, Charles Sanford Terry numbers 171 and 172, and you'll notice that I have very, very small little poster board things up, which I'll hold closer to the screen so you can get a sense of it in a minute. And I want to work through each of those, and I want to discuss the discussion of commonalities that I've noticed, both particularly between this last pair, but also the other settings of this, chorale settings. And then in addition to those 4 chorale settings, straight ahead four-part chorale settings, there's also another setting of Herzliebster Jesu used in the Saint Matthew Passion, which is it's a tenor recitative that includes a 4-part choral setting, a 4-part chorale setting of another verse of Herzliebster Jesu. So we'll talk a little bit about that as well. But mostly, what I was mostly interested in were the chorales, the actual chorale settings. I won't spend a lot of time on the recitative, although it is important for various reasons and in the overall general sense of the group. I'll talk about it there. Okay, so let me show you first of all. I'll put these up as close as I can, and I'll hold them for a minute. I'll hold them for a count of like of 10 hippopotamuses, which I will count off slowly. Here's the first one, starting now. And 10 ringy-dingy. All right. And here's the second one, which I will do the same thing for. It's important you're able to see these because I'm going to be talking from these throughout my discussion. Here's the second one. 10 hippopotamuses starting from now. Ten ringy-dingy. Okay, so you'll have those in the back of your mind, and I need to work from them myself. Okay, now in Terry 171, things that I happened to notice that were interesting is the fact in this Terry number 171. As well as 172, there's a very, very sparse use of non-chord tones in the soprano melody, or in the soprano setting of the soprano, where the chorale tune actually is. There's a passing tone in each of those settings, but it would stand to reason that the theme of this particular setup, in a sense, variations, doesn't get a whole lot of elaboration because that's the expressive bit upon which the rest of the chorale or the rest of the set of variational processes that at least that's what I'm going to call them, for lack of a better word, that Bach employs in these two chorales. Okay. Now there are no cross relations in 171. And there are also very, very few secondary dominants. As a matter of fact, there is only one secondary dominant in this whole thing. There's a 7 diminished to a 1 in E. That happens right about here around measure 9, and that's the only secondary function chord that you have in this particular one. All four of these chorales, all of them emphasize in one way or another D major or D minor. These last two, since they're both in B minor, and you would expect it does this as you would expect. It emphasizes in one of their cadences. As a matter of fact, in the second cadence of both of these chorale settings, D D major is modulated to. And then also in these last two, E as an eric is emphasized quite strongly, and I'll talk a little bit about that here in a minute. In the in Terry 171, and again, these chorales are also the videos, the YouTube videos of these chorales with the score is included in the little blurb that I attached to this discussion. So you can see and hear the thing go by if you want to. In fact, I'd encourage it a couple of times, in fact. Okay, so E is emphasized prominently with a 5-1 type of leap in the bass. It's not in E minor, but there's a 5-1 so-do to E minor, or E minorish leap, right at the very beginning. And then towards here, towards measure 8 or so, there's a there is a 5-1 leap in the bass as well here of E. So there's sort of a bit of an emphasis on E at the beginning, a bit more of an emphasis on E towards the end, and then also there is one secondary of E to happen in this chorale. Also interesting is that I found that this also, and this one is, there's this wonderful tritone leap towards the end of this, where the text is talking about misdeeds or mistaten. There's a marvelous tritone leap in the bass there, which is a very good setting for it, a very good underscoring for there's an underscoring for misdeeds in that diabolos in musico tritone leap in the bass there, which is also rather interesting. So I think that was all quite. So that's sort of what's happening in this. Okay, and let me just go see. Let me get. Of course, there's something that I forgot to bring over, but I'll be right back. Sorry about that. Oh, let me find that. Wherein I be dangerous. Yeah, I forgot my copy of the big blue book of Terry's big blue book of chorales, and I also want to talk a little bit. Let me just get to this first. And then also here, right at about here, there is a very large leaping. There's a very large where it's the last beat of measure 1. The last beat of measure 9. Here, there's this marvelous, in addition to this wonderful tritone leap in the bass, and there's a marvelous, wonderfully marvelous, quote-unquote, spacing error that Mr. Asafiev pointed out in his online article between the soprano and the alto of a minor tenth, major tenth, between a low D in the alto and a high F sharp in the soprano. That's a very, very, very large space. So, and I'm wondering whether or not that kind of spacing error or spacing anomaly, spacing misdeed, might be, since they're talking about this, Herzliebster Jesu, was hast du verbrochen, dass man ein solch scharf Urteil hat gesprochen. Was ist die Schuld, in was für Misstaten? bist du geraten, or, and this is the first verse again, oh, what great crime hast thou to make confession? What dark transgression? And mistaten is misdeed or crime, or that's set, so that and that wonderful large spacing leap, in addition to the tritone here, I think sets that, is wonderful symbolism for that text. Okay. All right. Now on the second one here, this is Terry 172. As I noted before, there is a largely unadorned cantus firmus in the soprano, with the exception of one passing tone. But there are lots. There's a cross, but there in this particular one of the pair of chorale settings in the St. Matthew Passion, there's, as opposed to the very, 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 very few chromatic chords, particularly secondaries. This one has a lot of them. There are a lot of secondary chords in this particular setting of Herzliebster Jesu. D major, of course, is emphasized in the second, in this cadence here, at about measure 6. Also like that, but also there's an E. So all four of these have a D emphasis here, and in these two particular phrases, it's the second, or the moving to the relative major, D major, of B minor that emphasizes D. But there's also, and the same cadence, the same types of cadences that you find in number 171. But there are, like I said, there are a lot more. Secondary chords, and particularly secondary dominants. In fact, there's within the first four or five beats of this particular one. And again, I would recommend that you go and look at these and hear them, and they're in the description below. This particular talk. Once it gets put up, I'd have you take a look at that, and you'll notice that there are, I think there's 4 or 5 secondary chords and inverted secondary chords in this one, right within the first measure of this. So Bach is making, look, here's where my secondaries are. Okay, let's see. Right. And then here there is a quick reference of a set 5-6-5 of E to 1 of E right here in the first 2 chords of the chorale. That 5 to 1 in E-ness is implied. And then over here we have more emphasis on E here as well, where we have this wonderful 7-6 to 1 in E happening over here around measure 8 and measure 9. So this sets up a very nice bit of voice crossing, or of cross relations. And let me get my Terry out here again. There's this marvelous. Where was I going with this? There's the same kind of E-ness here at the end. Okay, so that happens. So it's very much the same as number 171. In fact, measure 170. If you look at the last few measures of like the last, the bass line, particularly of 171 and 170, you'll notice that there's quite a bit of repetition, and I'll get to that in a minute. And then, so there's a wonderful voice crossing in measure 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, or cross relation 1, 4, 5, 6, 7. Measure 7 of 172, where the G sharp and the tenor on the first half of the first beat is followed on the second beat of a G natural in the bass, making a very nice cross relationship. And this again is a or Schuld, or crime, or misdeed. Again, this is, take that with a grain of salt. But this kind of thing tended not to be really done. And people were back then were pretty careful about stuff like this, unless there was some kind of expressive reason for this. And I think that these tritone leaps and the wide spacings and the cross relations all are kinds of quote-unquote misdeeds that's a nice allusion to of misdeeds or transgressions, using the harmonic language of the 18th century. So, okay. All right, so those are all really quite fascinating, and I would really strongly recommend that you take a look at the recordings that I put in the description of this below. Okay, so it's subpaper. So in both, now let's talk a little bit. Oh yes, right. Before I do that, I'm getting ahead of myself here. I'm getting ahead of myself in the fact that I haven't told you a little bit about the dramatic contexts. I should have done this earlier, but let me do it now. I want to compare a little bit of the dramatic context of where these chorales and recitatives, or chorales and recitative occur in each of the passions. In the St. John Passion, there are two chorales, and the first chorale is sung at about the time where we're in the Garden of Gethsemane, where Jesus is confronted by the crowd coming to arrest him, along with Judas, of course. And Jesus asked, "Who do you seek?" Jesus Christ, that Jesus of Nazareth, "I am he." And you can take me, but let these others, in other words, the other disciples, let them go. So that first chorale happens around that point in the Passion story, and then the second one in the St. John Passion occurs during the trial of Jesus, where Pilate is asking, "Are you so you're king of the Jews?" And Jesus answers to the effect that my kingship is not of this world. If it was of this world, then my people would fight for me. And then Pilate snarks back, "Oh, so you are a king, huh?" So that's where that happens in the St. John Passion. In the St. Matthew Passion, as I said before, there are two chorales and another statement of this chorale tune in the context of a tenor recitative. And where those happen. The first chorale in the St. Matthew Passion happens practically right at the beginning of the piece, where Jesus foretells his death, and when the priests come together to plot the capture and ultimate demise of Jesus. The recitative happens in the Garden of Gethsemane, where Christ has left most of his disciples and taken Peter, John, and James. I think those are the ones. Yeah, I'm just referencing Jesus Christ Superstar there for a minute. Yeah, the three that went off with him. And Christ walks off to pray privately and is basically having a full-blown panic attack. And you would think, and that would make sense over what's happened, the ultimate the ultimate end of this, is in his crucifixion and death. And then the last chorale happens right after where Jesus where the place where Pilate asks the crowd, "Whom would you prefer I release on due to Passover? This man Jesus Christ, known as King of the Jews, or as Barabbas?" Barabbas, of course, is a thief and a murderer, or at least that's what we're told in the Bible. And the crowd answers, "Barabbas, Barabbas, 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 give us Barabbas." All that kind of thing, and let Jesus be crucified. And I think it's particularly interesting that right after this, you have a very chromatic line with lots of secondary leading tones happening. In other words, sharp notes. Nails are sharp and they hurt. Right after this, in the second setting of this second B minor setting of the chorale. So those are sort of where the chorale settings and the recitative, the one recitative, occurs in the two passages. I should have said that prior to this. Forgot to. Sorry about that, but at least I didn't forget entirely. All right, okay. Sopranos, key pitch commonalities and subpairs. Okay, let me mention this. Okay, so we've talked a little bit about the commonalities that there are subpairs of both 169 and 170, as well as 171 and 172, have subpairs that use. There are varying degrees of chromaticism in these four chorales. Of the two groups, one is less chromatic, and the second one is more chromatic. These same subpairs also have one chorale with a cross relation in it, and as well as spacing errors that we talked about earlier. So all four of these, those characteristics are common to all four of these chorale settings. Okay, now, all right, so that's sort of where this is what I've discovered. But I also discovered something else, which I wasn't really expecting, and which is one of the reasons why I kind of suspect that a certain amount of self-parody, conscious self-parody, may be happening between chorales 171 and 172. And let me turn around the big screen here. And I wonder, what this is a map or a general chart of of common material in 171 and 172. And you'll notice that, and we'll look at this sort of from here's the soprano line, here is the alto line, tenor line, and bass line. It's really, as you might expect, there's a lot of overlap of material in the sopranos of 171 as well as 172, with the exception of there's a non-chord tone or a passing tone early in setting 171, and then another late, and then there's another non-chord tone used later on in 172. So there's quite a bit of consistent overlap between these. Now here, and of course you also see quite a bit in the bass line, and these basically sort of show you where these are the measure numbers, and then these are the shared material. The bass has quite a lot of shared material here and there in both of these. So there's a lot of actual material commonality between these two. But what I found particularly interesting was this. how, pardon me a second, throat cleared, you know. What I noticed was that there's a lot of material that are shared. So this alto line here at about measure 4, partway into measure 5, is the same in both of these, and then this is also common to both 172 and approximately measure 7 to about 9.1 or so, and then similarly here there are 3 places where the tenors are identical, but then we have something like this happening. Some of the material that originally was found in the alto of 171 comes down here and is restated here in the tenor in 172. Similarly, some of the material in measure 8 of the tenor in 171 is put into the soprano, not the soprano, but the alto in measure in chorale number 1, Terry number 172. So there's a lot of common material and a lot, in fact, identical material between these two, 171 and 172. But also notice over here, notice the wonderful exchange, or dare I say, crossing of material right around where a lot of other things having to do with the cross relations, etc., happened, as well as in the harmonically. So I think this is really quite fascinating. So it looks like Bach probably consciously, although I can't be sure, although I wouldn't be surprised if he did, consciously used this idea of crossing and misdeeds and transgression to come up with this material. So, anyway, that's I found this to be really, really, really very, very, very fascinating. This is really fascinating. But, and as if all that weren't enough, let me show you something else I noticed. As I said before, the phrase structure in each of the chorales. Let me get to a clean page here. We said before that in each of these chorales there are 4 phrases, 1, 2, 3, and 4. Interestingly enough, and that in this 4-phrase succession, these green are phrases 1 through 1, 2, and 4. It's consistently where it seems like the most, where Bach, particularly in the third, in the third phrase, really goes all out with his expressive interpretive virtuosity. Adds the saves for the third phrase the real sort of heightened symbolic dramatic interest, which I find quite fascinating. Now, I also want to point out that all 4 of these chorales are what I'm choosing to call harmonically closed. In other words, they begin and end in the same key. They begin and end in the same key. But what's kind of interesting is the fact that the recitative, which is the 4th of the 5 movements that wherein Herzliebster Jesu, hast, verbrochen is set, the recitative is not harmonically closed. It begins and ends in different keys, and I'm pretty sure that this is partly done, at least, and probably consciously done, to help underscore the fact of Jesus wandering around in the Gethsemane, begging God, please let this cup pass from me if at all possible. Please, Father, help me. I'm scared to death. Please, if this can be passed, let it pass from me. Please, I'm scared. I don't want to die, et cetera, et cetera. He's wandering around in a quite logical way, in a way, over his impending demise. But it's interesting that if you look at and I have no idea whether or not these pieces were written in chronological order, but I have no idea whether that's actually the case or not. I just don't know. But isn't it interesting that you have four? Let me do this again. You have four chorales settings of Herzliebster Jesu, all of which are harmonically closed, and the next to last of the group is harmonically open, the harmonically open recitative. So in other words, it's kind of like Bach is kind of saving his real expressive virtuosic tours de force, as we say, for the next to last item in these collections. And again, I have no idea whether or not he was conscious of this, whether this even occurred to him. I have no idea. So it might well be, to use a term that I remember from my graduate school day. Oh, that's all just fortuitous. Well, maybe it is. But isn't it interesting that even if this is not conscious, and maybe especially because this kind of thing is not conscious all the time, that you're not consciously thinking about this stuff when you're composing, it's amazing how consistent it seems like this pattern tends to be. Is that fascinating? God, I love this stuff. Anyway, okay, so that's basically what I have for you today, and this effectively sums up my series of musings on the Bach chorales for now. I hope you've enjoyed it. I've certainly learned a lot, and thanks again, and we'll talk with you soon, and any and all comments I would definitely appreciate when I post these things and people would like to give me a response. Also, one other blatant bit of self-promotion. In November at COD on the 7th, I think it's the 7th, November 7th, or one Friday at noon at COD, I'm going to be presenting research that some research that I've been conducting on symmetry and reuse of material in the music of Samuel Barber, with particular focus on 4 selections from his Opus 29 Hermit songs. And if you have time to stop by and join me there, I would really like to see you. Okay, all right, that's for now. Thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. Let me know what you think, and bye for now.